Welcome back, listeners, to Radio 13, The Hidden Nightmares, Episode 04. Today we're diving into a fresh batch of chilling tales that promise to thrill and terrify. So, sit tight as we kick things off with our first story from Sarah. Get ready to be captivated.
I had only been in the new apartment for a week when the strange things started happening. The place was nice enough, small, but it had this cozy charm to it. The bedroom was on the second floor, giving me a view of the quiet street below. I thought I'd finally found some peace after months of searching for a place that felt right. That was until I saw it. It started the first night I spent there. I remember feeling exhausted after unpacking all day, my muscles aching as I climbed into bed. The soft hum of the city outside was soothing, lulling me into a much-needed rest. But something woke me up around midnight. I couldn't put my finger on what it was, just an eerie feeling that I wasn't alone. Groggy, I glanced out the window, expecting nothing but darkness and the faint glow of streetlights. But there it was, a figure. At first I thought I was imagining things. It was just a shadow, surely. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The figure was still there, standing perfectly still just outside the window, even though I was on the second floor. There was no balcony, no ledge for anyone to stand on, just the sheer drop to the pavement below. And yet, this figure remained, staring straight at me. A cold dread crept up my spine. I couldn't make out any features, just the outline of a person. Tall, dark, and unnervingly still. My breath hitched, and for what felt like an eternity, I couldn't move, my body frozen with fear. Eventually, I managed to pull the blanket over my head like a child hiding from a nightmare. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, maybe a tree casting weird shadows. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been a dream, just my imagination playing tricks on me in a new, unfamiliar place. I thought maybe I was just exhausted. It's normal to feel a bit out of sorts after a move, right? Besides, who would believe me? No one would. When I told a friend, they just laughed and said it was probably stress. But I know what I saw. It was real. I'm sure of it. But when night fell again, and I crawled back into bed, that feeling returned. The uneasy tension. And sure enough, when I peeked through the curtains, there it was, standing in the exact same spot, watching me. Every night since, it's been there. It never moves, never gets closer, but it's always watching. I can feel its eyes on me, even though I can't see them. I've tried keeping the curtains closed, but it doesn't help. I know it's still there. I feel it. At first, I thought I could shake it off, that it would stop if I ignored it. But every time I look out, it's there, silent, unmoving, waiting. And it's starting to take its toll on me. I haven't slept properly in days. I feel like I'm losing control of my thoughts, like my mind is unraveling. Every time I close my eyes, I see it. It's like my brain is torturing me with the memory of its presence, even when it's not there. The worst part is, no one believes me. They keep telling me to relax, that it's just stress. But I know better. I've never felt so isolated. Sometimes I wonder if I'm going crazy. But when I stand at the window and see it, I know this is no dream. It's real as the cold air against my skin. And I can't prove it to anyone, not even to myself. There's something about the way it just stands there that fills me with a dread I can't explain. It's not just the sight of it. It's the feeling, like it knows me. Like it's waiting for something. And that's what terrifies me most. What does it want from me? Why is it here, night after night? I have no answers, and I'm not sure I want to find out. I've thought about moving, but what if it follows me? What if it's not the apartment? What if it's me? There's this gnawing feeling in my chest that tells me no matter where I go, I'll still see it, that I can't escape. I feel like I'm trapped in some horrible nightmare, only this time, I can't wake up. I used to feel safe in my own space. This was supposed to be my sanctuary. But now, even in the middle of the day, I can't shake the feeling that it's out there, just waiting for the sun to go down. I've never felt more alone, more helpless, and I dread the night. I dread looking out the window, but I can't help it. My eyes always drift to that spot. One day, it'll be closer. I know it. I don't know what I'll do when that happens. It's like I'm waiting for something horrible that I can't prevent. I can't live like this anymore, but I'm terrified to leave, and I'm even more terrified to stay.
Thank you, Sarah, for that captivating and haunting story. We'd love to hear your thoughts. How did that tale resonate with you? Drop your comments below and let's chat. Now, let's move on to our second story of the evening, featuring an equally intriguing tale from Thomas. It was one of those nights where the rain seemed to fall endlessly, turning the world outside my windshield into a blur of dark shadows and shimmering streetlights. The roads were empty. No surprise given the weather and the late hour. I'd been driving my taxi for hours, the monotony of the rain tapping on the roof, my only company. The wipers squeaked rhythmically as I passed through the outskirts of town, a long, desolate stretch of road with hardly a soul in sight. Then, I saw it. Up ahead, the cemetery. It was a massive, eerie expanse that stretched out for what felt like miles, with tombstones poking out of the ground like crooked teeth. Even in daylight, this place had a way of making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. But at night, with the rain pouring down and fog curling around the graves, it looked like something out of a nightmare. I tried to focus on the road, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But as my taxi approached the edge of the cemetery, something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the rain, some stray light or shadow. But then I saw her. A figure on the side of the road, barely visible through the mist. She was walking. No, more like drifting, slowly along the shoulder, her blonde hair hanging in wet strands around her face. She wore a white dress, soaked from the rain, and her bare feet splashed through the puddles as she moved. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, a cold shiver creeping down my spine. What was a girl doing out here, alone, in the middle of the night, especially near the cemetery, of all places? I tried to reason with myself. Maybe she was just out for a late-night walk. Maybe she lived nearby. But there weren't many houses around here, just fields, woods, and that endless stretch of graves. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were blue, so blue that they seemed to almost glow in the darkness. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I told myself it was just the rain, the poor lighting, but deep down I knew something was off. She didn't seem scared, didn't seem in any hurry despite the storm. She just stood there looking at me, and then she raised her hand, waving. The universal sign for a ride. I hesitated. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to drive past, to leave her there and keep going. But what kind of man leaves a girl stranded in the rain? So, against my better judgment, I slowed the car and pulled over to the side of the road. The rain pounded on the roof as I rolled down the window slightly. "Do you need a ride?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded, her wet hair clinging to her face. "Yes, thank you," she said softly, her voice cold and distant, like she'd been standing out in the storm for too long. "Could you take me just a little further up the road? My house is not far from here." I nodded, unlocking the door and motioning for her to get in. She slid into the back seat without a word, her wet dress sticking to the leather seats. I tried not to think about how odd it all was, the way she moved, the eerie calm in her voice, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I cleared my throat, trying to break the silence. "It's pretty late to be out walking. You live around here?" "Yes," she replied quietly, her tone still cold and detached. "My house is just up ahead." I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was staring straight ahead, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't shiver, didn't look cold despite being drenched from head to toe. I tried to focus on driving, hoping the conversation would distract me from the uneasy feeling growing in my chest. As we passed the cemetery, I could feel the temperature drop. The windows fogged up slightly, and I had to keep wiping them with my sleeve just to see. The fog swirled around the gravestones, thick and heavy, making the tombs look like ghostly figures rising from the ground. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. When we finally passed the last of the graves, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The road ahead was clear now, no more fog, just the dark stretch of asphalt illuminated by my headlights. I felt a small sense of relief. "Should be coming up on your house soon," I said, more to fill the silence than anything else. But when I glanced in the rearview mirror again, my heart stopped. She was gone. The back seat was empty, the door still closed. There was no trace of her, no wet footprints, no sign that anyone had ever been there at all. I slammed on the brakes, my pulse pounding in my ears. I spun around in my seat, frantically searching the back of the car. Nothing. I stared at the empty seat, my mind racing. She had been there. I knew she had. I could still feel the cold where she'd sat, still hear her soft, distant voice. But now, she was gone. Vanished, without a sound. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. I glanced back at the cemetery in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw her, standing among the tombstones, her white dress billowing in the wind, watching me. I didn't stick around to find out. I slammed my foot on the gas and drove as fast as I could, not stopping until I was far, far away from that road, from the cemetery. Thank you, Thomas, for that fantastic story. Now, what did you all think of his tale? There are some phenomena we just can't explain, but it's truly amazing to share these experiences and find empathy in one another, isn't it? Now, let's dive into our next story from Joe. Sit back and listen closely. I've seen more death than I care to remember. As a cop, it comes with the job, especially when you're the one who gets called to the scene first. And let me tell you, there's nothing that sticks with you quite like the aftermath of a car accident. Twisted metal, shattered glass, blood staining the asphalt. But it's not the wreckage that haunts me. It's the bodies, the people whose lives ended in the blink of an eye. It never gets easier. You can tell yourself it's just part of the job, that you're helping in some way. But when you're the one pulling broken bodies from mangled cars, it chips away at you, little by little. Until one day, you wake up and realize you're not the same person you used to be. Today was different. Today, something broke in me. The call came in like any other. A crash on the highway just outside of town. Single vehicle, multiple victims, the dispatcher said. I could already picture it. A family, maybe. Someone swerving to avoid an animal or a drunk driver. It didn't matter. The result was always the same. I arrived before the paramedics, as usual. The car was upside down, its roof caved in from the impact. A twisted, crumpled mess of metal and glass. I could hear the sound of the rain hitting the wreck, the smell of gasoline thick in the air. 2 bodies had already been pulled out, parents, most likely. But there was another, a child. The boy couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. He was wedged between the seats in the back, his small body crushed in the wreckage. My stomach turned as I reached in to pull him free. His limbs were twisted, unnatural, and his face, God, his face, bruised and pale, with streaks of blood running down from his scalp. I'd seen it all before, but something about this felt different. Maybe I'd just reached my limit. As I gripped him under the arms and started to pull, I felt a sudden chill sweep through me. I told myself it was the rain, the wind, but it wasn't. It was something else. I was halfway through dragging his lifeless body out of the car when it happened. He opened his eyes. I froze. Those wide, glassy eyes locked onto mine. My heart stopped. His lips parted, and for a moment I thought he was going to say something, to cry out in pain or beg for help. But instead, he did something I'll never forget. He laughed. A soft, breathy giggle that echoed through the wreckage, cutting through the rain and the roar of the traffic in the distance. My blood ran cold. I dropped him, stumbling back, my heart hammering in my chest. The boy's body lay limp again, eyes closed, just as lifeless as before. I stared at him, my mind racing. No, that wasn't possible. I had seen it. I had seen it. He was dead. I knew he was dead. But those eyes, that laugh. I crouched down, staring at the boy's face, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing. He was gone, just like all the others. A wave of nausea hit me, and I stumbled back again, trying to catch my breath. Was it real? Had I imagined it? Was I finally losing it after all these years? I felt dizzy, lightheaded, the world spinning around me. I stood there in the pouring rain, staring at the boy, my hands trembling. It was just in my head. It had to be. I was tired, burnt out. I'd seen too much, dealt with too much. But then why couldn't I shake the sound of his laughter? The paramedics arrived shortly after, rushing to the scene. I didn't say a word to them about what I'd seen. I couldn't. They'd think I was crazy. Hell, I was crazy, wasn't I? I watched as they zipped the boy into a body bag, his face disappearing under the black vinyl. It was over. He was gone. But that laugh, It echoed in my mind over and over again like a broken record. This was it. The moment I knew I couldn't do this anymore. The moment I realized I was finished. After today, I'd never pull another body from a wreck, but I'd never show up to another call like this, because if I did, I knew the next time I might not be able to tell what's real and what's not. I walked back to my cruiser, drenched and shaken, the rain pounding against the hood. But even as I drove away, I couldn't escape it. The image of that boy's cold, dead eyes, the sound of that horrible, mocking laugh. I don't know if it was real, I don't know if I imagined it, but one thing's for sure, I'm not coming back from this, not this time. Thank you, Joe, for that incredible story. Now let's move on to our next tale, this time from Emma. You won't want to miss it. Listeners, tune in closely.
I've always heard that cats are supposed to be sensitive to things we can't see. Spirits, energies, whatever you want to call them. I never gave it much thought until a few days ago. Now I can't stop thinking about it. It started with small things. My cat, Milo, would just sit there, staring at me. Not in the usual, I'm hungry, feed me way. No, this was different. He'd sit perfectly still, his yellow eyes locked onto my face, not blinking, not moving a muscle. At first, I thought it was funny. "What's up, buddy?" I'd ask him, rubbing his ears. But he wouldn't respond, wouldn't purr. He'd just keep staring. It wasn't until later that I noticed something odd. Milo wasn't really looking at me. His eyes weren't focused on mine. They were off, like he was looking past me. I shrugged it off at first, thinking maybe it was just the way his eyes caught the light. Cats do weird things sometimes, right? But over the next few days, the staring continued. Every time I'd be sitting on the couch or working at my desk, I'd feel his gaze burning into me. And every time I'd get the creeping sensation that he wasn't looking at me, but behind me. Last night, it happened again. I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I felt it. That familiar, unnerving feeling. I glanced over, and there he was, sitting on the armrest, eyes wide and unblinking, staring right at me. Or so I thought. This time, I couldn't shake the unease. My skin prickled, a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. Slowly, hesitantly, I turned around. There was nothing there, just the wall, the dim light from the hallway. I laughed at myself, trying to calm down. "Get it together," I muttered, turning back to Milo. But he hadn't moved, still staring, still frozen. My heart started to race. Why wasn't he moving? I reached out to pet him, but he didn't respond. His eyes, though, remained locked on that spot behind me, like he could see something I couldn't. Something that I didn't want to see. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, everything felt off. I woke up late, groggy, with a sense of dread hanging over me. I looked around for Milo, expecting him to jump onto the bed or meow for breakfast. But the apartment was quiet, too quiet. I found him on the couch where he'd been the night before. Only this time he wasn't staring. He wasn't doing anything at all. He was curled up, motionless, his body cold and stiff. Milo was dead. I stood there staring at his lifeless form, my mind reeling. He had been fine just last night, perfectly healthy. There was no reason for him to just die. But he had. And now that feeling, that horrible, creeping sensation, was back. It wrapped around me, cold and sudden, as I stood there trying to process what had just happened. Something was wrong. I knew it. Deep down I could feel it. Milo hadn't been staring at me all those times. He had been trying to warn me about whatever was lurking behind me. I haven't been able to shake the feeling since. I don't know what it is, but I feel it, watching, waiting, just like Milo had. And every time I feel it, I can't help but wonder if it's still there, behind me, right now.
Thank you, Emma, for that incredible story. All right, listeners, we've just experienced 4 tales, each stirring a mix of emotions: anticipation, unease, and fear. I hope the thrilling and haunting elements of each story have provided you with an unforgettable experience. Now let's take a short break before we jump into our segment, Horrors from Around the World. Don't go anywhere.
In the dark, the moon's pale light, cold winds chill me to the bone. Old shadows still return, leading me into a realm unknown. Eyes shining like stars but cold as ice, words that scream deep inside. Memories pressed downwards, release, guiding me through every haunting dream. In the dark, nightmares drift, shadows waiting there. Whispers like the wind's caress make my heart ache in despair. In the dark, the moon's pale light, cold winds chill me to the bone. Old shadows still return, leading me into a realm unknown. Eyes shining like stars but cold as ice.
Welcome back to the show. It's time for our segment, Horrors from Around the World. And today, we'll be diving into the chilling tale of the haunting of the Black Cat. So listeners, get ready to tune in and immerse yourselves in this eerie story. The Haunting of the Black Cat. In the small, isolated town of Ash Hollow, an ancient tale lingered in whispers. The legend of the rising dead, a fearsome creature said to emerge when a black cat leaped over a corpse before burial. The townsfolk treated this lore as mere superstition, dismissing it with laughter. But when Lucy, a curious newcomer, arrived, she couldn't resist the urge to explore. One autumn evening, after hearing the chilling story from the town's elderly residents, Lucy visited the local cemetery, where she stumbled upon an abandoned grave adorned with a single wilting flower. Just as she knelt to examine it, a sleek black cat darted across the grave, its eyes glinting like two polished stones. A chill crept down her spine, but she shrugged it off, attributing her discomfort to the cool night air. The next day, a funeral for a local man, Old Man Jenkins, took place. He was known for his peculiar habits and superstitions. The townsfolk spoke of how he believed the spirit of his deceased wife lingered in the house. As the coffin was lowered, Lucy noticed the same black cat watching from a distance. It seemed oddly fixated on Jenkins' lifeless form. That night, Lucy lay awake, feeling an inexplicable pull to the cemetery. Drawn by a force she couldn't comprehend, she grabbed her jacket and stepped into the darkness. The moon hung low, casting eerie shadows that danced among the headstones. As she approached Jenkins' grave, she saw the black cat perched atop the coffin, staring down intently. Suddenly, an unsettling sound broke the silence, a low, guttural growl. To her horror, the lid of the coffin began to shift. It opened slowly, revealing Jenkins' pale face, eyes wide and unseeing. The cat leaped down, arching its back as if to protect its territory. "Help me," Jenkins croaked. But his voice was laced with something unnatural, a malevolence that chilled Lucy to her core. Just then, the black cat darted behind her, and she felt a cold breath on her neck. Turning quickly, she found herself face to face with a shadowy figure, an entity that resembled Jenkins, but with hollow eyes and a wicked grin. It moved with an uncanny grace, mimicking his gestures, but with an unsettling twist. Lucy stumbled back, realizing too late that this was not Old Man Jenkins. This was the rising dead. In a desperate attempt to flee, she turned to run, but the cat blocked her path, hissing fiercely. It was a guardian of the dead, ensuring no living soul escaped the grasp of the one who had risen. Suddenly, the ground beneath her trembled, and eerie whispers filled the air, echoing tales of lost souls and lingering regrets. The moonlight flickered ominously as shadows twisted into grotesque shapes, seeming to reach for her. Among the whispers, Lucy discerned familiar voices, friends, neighbors, and loved ones who had passed, all warning her to leave while she could. Panic surged through her as the shadow lunged, and she felt an icy hand grasp her wrist, pulling her closer to its twisted reality. "Join me," it whispered, an invitation that promised eternal torment. With her heart racing, Lucy summoned every ounce of strength to break free. She sprinted past the cat, who watched her with an almost human-like intelligence, as if it were deciding whether to let her go. She reached the cemetery gate, flinging it open, and bolted into the night. As she ran, she could hear the faint echo of Jenkins' laughter, twisted and haunting. Behind her, the black cat leaped through the air, but it never chased her. Instead, it settled back on the grave, watching her retreat with an eerie calm. Back in her apartment, Lucy locked the door and collapsed against it, gasping for breath. The weight of the night pressed down on her as she stared into the shadows of her room, haunted by the chilling feeling that something had followed her home. Days turned into weeks, and she began to notice strange occurrences. Shadows danced at the corners of her vision, and at night she would hear scratching sounds at her window. Each time she looked outside, she saw the black cat, staring, unmoving, as if waiting for her to return to the cemetery. Unable to sleep, she delved deeper into the town's history, uncovering tales of others who had encountered the rising dead. Many had vanished, their names forgotten, but the cat was always seen lingering nearby. It was said that those who ignored the warnings would soon find themselves trapped in a nightmare, living out the lives of the dead. One stormy night, Lucy felt a compulsion to return to the cemetery. As she approached Jenkins' grave, the air grew thick with tension. The cat was there, but this time it wasn't alone. Shadows flickered around her, and the whispers intensified, merging into a cacophony of voices pleading for release. As she reached the grave, she noticed the ground was disturbed, as if something beneath was restless. The lid of Jenkins' coffin was ajar, and the entity rose, its hollow eyes burning with insatiable hunger. "You have returned," it hissed, the words twisting in her mind like thorns. In that moment, Lucy realized she had a choice: to succumb to the darkness or to fight for her freedom. Summoning all her courage, she faced the entity and shouted, "I am not afraid of you." The ground trembled as the shadows recoiled, and the cat let out a piercing yowl, as if rallying the spirits of the restless dead. With a blinding flash of light, the cemetery erupted in chaos. The spirits once trapped began to swirl around her, their faces a mix of hope and despair. They reached out, urging her to escape, to break the cycle of fear that had gripped Ash Hollow for generations. Lucy turned and ran, pushing through the thrumming energy until she burst through the cemetery gate, gasping for air. Behind her, the sounds of the rising dead faded into a haunting silence, leaving only the whispers of the free. But even as she fled, she could still feel the weight of the black cat's gaze upon her. She knew the legend would live on, a dark reminder that some doors should never be opened, and some cats should never be disturbed. The shadows of Ash Hollow would remain, waiting for the next soul brave or foolish enough to seek the truth. Thank you so much for joining us and listening to our stories this evening. Unfortunately, that brings us to the end of tonight's show. We wish you a relaxing and joyful weekend. Goodbye for now, and we look forward to seeing you all next Saturday night. Support us by liking, sharing, and leaving a comment. For more spine-chilling stories, visit our website at http://radio.lovestoblog.com/ and don't forget to check out our store at hts radio-edi-store.printify.me/products to grab your favorite items for the 2024 Halloween season.
Stretch long, but the end is unknown. A station where no one should have gone.